So at this time, I would like to introduce a group or two people that I have come to know so well. Ted reminds me that we are 2005 graduates of Leadership New Jersey. No, I'm going to say it loud and clear. 2005 Leadership New Jersey graduates, and one of our presenters later, Alethea Batts, is also on the line. So it's like a little mini reunion. So I'm so happy that you all are here. Taft Communications has conducted a DE&I survey each year, and they're here to share with us the results. So just a little bit about our partners at Taft. Taft is a communications consulting firm located in the Princeton area that specializes in purpose and impact. Taft ClearPoint is the firm's practice in leadership communications, is the go-to source for leaders and aspiring leaders to acquire the skills needed to master today's constant conversation. Joining us today is Ted Deutsch, CEO and Managing Partner, and Sheila Cort, Senior Director and DEI Lead. In his role, Ted drives successful client service and Taft's overall growth, and also rolls up his sleeves, and I've seen him do that for sure, to give the firm's staff and clients the benefit of nearly 25 years experience in corporate communications and public affairs. He is a longtime champion of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and is the creator of Taft's annual State of Diversity survey, which we will hear more about shortly. Sheila leads Taft's ClearPoint and DEI practices, where she brings her knowledge and experience from a diverse, over 30-year communications career spanning corporate, agency, and consultant work. Sheila works closely with a variety of clients on internal and external communications, strategic planning and leadership, and DEI communications, helping them to develop and share their stories. So Ted and Sheila, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jackie, and good morning, everyone. Great to see you, and thanks for giving us the chance to share some of our recent research and data with you. Jackie should have clarified that Alethea, Jackie, and myself did the LNJ program in 2005 as high school students, just in case there was any confusion about our potential advanced age. But it is nice to get back together, and Jackie and Taft have been lucky enough to work together on some things over the years. So very happy to be introduced by her, and we appreciate that. And I also want to say, while we pull up our slides, how much we appreciate that NJBIA has taken a leadership role in promoting strong DEI practices throughout the state. Not every state association has been as proactive and active as we have. I want to especially thank Michelle for stepping up several years ago to partner with us on this research, which we've been sharing in New Jersey since 2016. Both Michelle and her team have really been just terrific, not just on this survey, but on all the activities, particularly over the last few years, and we're happy to be part of it. What we'd like to do this morning is preview a bit of our research from the most recent State of Diversity survey, and for the first time, since we began 2016, we went national and collected data nationally. And there is a lot of data to share. We're going to just give you some highlights. And if it piques your interest, you are more than welcome to go to our website and download the full report. Be warned, there's more than 200 pages of data, but it's really fascinating, and you can slice and dice it many different ways.
Well, Ted, if I can interrupt for one moment, I am having a problem sharing. It's saying that my ability is disabled.
That may be something
Wait,
can solve.
Go. I think it's been solved. Thank you.
Great.
Okay, I am going to go into show mode.
So we can go right to the second slide, Sheila. Thank you, Jackie, for mentioning who Taft is. Just a minute on that. And before we turn to our data, we are based in the Princeton area, and the firm has been around for nearly 40 years. We'll celebrate 40 years next year, founded by Mara Connolly and Pete Taft. Some of you may have encountered them during your years in the state. And while for much of our history, we've had a strong focus in the healthcare area and still have many clients there, the last several years, we've really focused our firm on communications to support purpose, helping clients articulate their core purpose, demonstrate its benefit, expand its impact, And how we define purpose is in our focus areas on this next slide. Everything from corporate social responsibility, DEI, social impact, health, employee engagement, sustainability. And of course, employee engagement is a key part of this conversation and all of your concerns, the intersection between DEI principles and practices and how you communicate them to your employees in a way that makes them feel more engaged. So the State of Diversity Survey, this is research that we conceived and created in 2016 for the first several years, focusing exclusively on New Jersey. So this is research sort of born out of New Jersey, originally focused in New Jersey, but now as of this year, both New Jersey and national data. The latest round of research was conducted in January with more than 1,400 adults who either are employed or recently employed. So it's a real focus on people's experience in the workplace. With the exception of one slide that Sheila will take you through, all the data you're going to see is from this year's survey, and a big focus on whether workers, how much workers care about DEI issues, what they perceive as their employer's commitment to them, and their different experiences in the workplace by race, by gender, by sexuality, by ability, and by political affiliation, which I'll touch on a little bit, but there's some really fascinating differences in people's political affiliation and how they feel about the workplace. So today, we'll share some data, draw a conclusion or two, but really want to just put it out there and let you draw your own conclusions and what it might say for how you might look at your own workplace practices. So as you see here, a question is why look at the state of diversity in the first place? For us, one of our core values as a firm is curiosity, how we approach all of our projects, all of our client challenges. And we were genuinely curious. Here we are living in one of the most diverse states in the country. Most of our employers are fairly diverse in the workplace, but our hometowns typically are not as diverse, which is a whole nother discussion about how New Jersey has evolved as it has. We wanted to look at what's going on in the difference between workplace and home communities. What are some barriers that people face in the workplace, difference in perception based on their backgrounds, and provide that information to the public at large and to executives like you so that you might moderate, adapt, and build your communications and your DEI with a greater sensitivity to those issues. And there has been a lot of interest from media and from clients in this research, both comparing how they perform versus the national and state averages, and just simply looking at how they can be better on their DEI practices. I'm going to pass the baton to Sheila. Before I do, I want to mention that last week, Sheila was just recognized nationally as a distinguished communicator by the Diversity Action Alliance, which held its national gala in New York. We're very proud of that well-deserved honor. So she didn't know I'd say that, but I want to say it because I'm proud of her, and turn it to Sheila to start talking about some of our data.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you. And Ted, don't make me blush so early in the morning. It is an honor to be here and to speak with all of you. So let's look at some numbers. We're talking about surveys and we're talking about data, and we all know from a business perspective, numbers matter, right? What we track, what we measure is important. Profits, loss, EBITDA, all those things are critical to a business. But dare we say, especially for those of us who deal in the DEI world and are either the leaders in that space or allies to the leaders in that space, that DEI numbers matter as well. When we look at some of these numbers, and many of you may be familiar with these numbers, they're not Taft numbers, these are Deloitte numbers. Many of us, again, who work in the DEI space use these numbers to remind our C-suite of the importance of DEI, to remind them of the value of DEI, to demonstrate that as we're measuring all those wonderful things, profit, loss, and many other numbers, attrition, retention, that measuring team performance, collaboration, decision-making quality, and so many more are critical. And a lot of those things wouldn't happen without diverse populations and without inclusion within our organizations. So we're talking to all of you today, and Ted already said that our survey takes a pulse of what's happening in the workplace, but why? Like, why are we so concerned about the workplace? Why aren't we worried about what's happening in our homes? Well, as you can see from the data right here, the workplace is where we interact the most with people who don't look like us, right? On a national level, 68% of us experience have interactions with others at work versus 50% outside of work, where we live, where we socialize. It's telling, and it's very interesting. And it's numbers that we need to be aware of as we are creating DEI programs internally in our organizations, that what our employees are experiencing in the office might be quite different from their day-to-day existence outside of the office. And a little bit of a shout out to New Jersey. As you can see here, our numbers rise for our diversity in the workplace. And again, remember what Michelle said at the top of our session today, New Jersey is a very diverse state. But then look at how we're interacting outside of work. We still remain quite segregated in our communities. So again, how we are focusing on DEI and namely inclusivity, which we'll be talking about throughout our conversation today, is critically important. What do employers want? Well, they are looking at their employees and thinking possibly one thing, and their employees are saying, no, 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 we want more. We want you to be responsible for inclusion. We all have a part in it as employees, but as employers, we too have a significant part in what's happening in our office. As you can see from this data point, 56% say we need more diverse hiring practices, right? Are we employing diverse slates? Are we looking at more candidates? Are we not being, dare I say, well, this is the way we've always done it, right? Are we breaking those barriers? 59% say they want their employers to build more inclusive cultures. Well, I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but inclusive cultures are critical. If we are all to work together to the best of our abilities, that's really important. So you can see in some of the sub data there, when it comes to diverse hiring, women, 61% of us are saying, yeah, this is important, right? And when we look at our LGBTQ community, 68% are saying we've got to do better. So who's leading? We all know that change starts at the top, right? Who are the leaders of our organization? When people in your organization, when they look up, are they seeing themselves? Are they hearing from their leaders in a strong and positive way when it comes to DEI? Well, our survey asked that question, and workers said, about 22% of them, nearly a quarter, we have no senior leaders of color in our organization. Well, gee, how can we say diversity is important if we're not seeing it? Another 36% say we have some. So there's work to be done, because if this is what people are seeing, then what are they experiencing on a day-to-day?
I'll speak to a few of the data points on that. I spoke earlier about how important it is to recognize the differences in how your employees experience diversity in the workplace and or perceive their treatment. So here, check out the divide between the Black experience and the white experience. And you've got the Hispanic experience kind of in between. 31% of Black workers feel they're treated differently in the workplace versus 16% of white. You might find 16% even surprisingly high. And when we drill down further, are you disciplined differently? 38% for Black respondents, 16% for white. Probably not shocking that there is a difference, but the gap, I think, pretty significant. And incidentally, if we dig down even further, and this is one of the things you might be curious to investigate on your own, there's a big divide on people's political affiliation and how they perceive difference in treatment. 22% of Democrats say some employees are treated differently in the workplace. Only 12% of Republicans see that there's a difference in how employees are treated. And again, on a lot of these data points, difference, that political polarization and different view is very apparent. Moving along, we ask some questions every year and look for sort of longitudinal trends, but then we try to add timely questions that get at what's going on in the world today. So we did ask a question about the pandemic. And I've read, I've seen, I've heard in plenty of webinars and articles, a lot of discussion about what has been the impact of the pandemic on racial equality, the experience in the workplace. And I'd say more than I've read has suggested that there's more positives than negatives. as we've been in a remote environment, which at a minimum can remove some microaggressions that some have experienced, whether because of gender, sexuality, race in the workplace. The data is kind of interesting here. Almost half of everyone who responded said they saw no impact on issues of racial equality, 46%. You don't see that number up there, that's the general number. Then when you look by specific group, here we're looking by race. What's interesting is while Black respondents had the highest number that thought there was a negative or positive impact, those numbers are pretty similar on the high end and the low end. In other words, there isn't an overwhelming sense that there has been more negative impact than positive impact. Either Black, white, Hispanic, there's a little bit more of a divide. So again, you can draw your own conclusions here, but fairly interesting that there wasn't a majority in any group that thought that there was a positive or negative impact. And again, a lot of political divisions that showed up in questions like this. If we can move on to the next data point, we ask a lot of questions about whether people hear offensive things in the workplace. What do you think? Is that happening? Are you proud that that never happens in your workplace? Well, again, when we look at all the data, Black respondents, 45% said at least somewhat often or frequently, so somewhat often and up, have heard offensive things about people of color. And even 23% of white respondents have reported the same thing. In terms of discrimination, almost three times as many Black respondents have felt discriminated against because of race. So once again, you see a big divide based on race. And let's look based on some other differences, not just race, at how people are experiencing the workplace differently. And again, this focusing on offensive discourse, offensive remarks in the workplace. LGBTQ plus, 36%, more than a third of your LGBTQ employees frequently, somewhat often or frequently, have heard language, remarks offensive in the workplace. That should be, I think, disturbing to all of us, as the last slide would as well. And folks with disabilities, pretty similar number, 34% have somewhat often or frequently heard something they interpreted as offensive or insulting. We did also drill down on issues related to religion. We didn't share a slide on that, but I can tell you that 18% of Jewish respondents have heard offensive remarks, 20% of Muslims, so pretty similar on those two numbers. We've been tracking New Jersey over the years, trying to see if there's been much of a change there, as both those groups have been very much in the headlines with rising discrimination and bias cases around the country. Those numbers have moved a little bit over the years. This year, there wasn't a big spike compared to 2021, which is arguably good news. And then lastly, on these data points, want to talk about age. So this I kind of find interesting. When you raise the question, do you hear offensive things about age in the workplace? You might intuitively think older workers would be the ones that would report the highest instances, but it's actually the opposite, as you see. And you can put your own theories on why that's the case. I would argue that, as many of you have, I'm sure, seen, Gen Z, millennial employees come into the workplace with a different set of expectations than their Gen X and their baby boomer colleagues in a lot of ways, in terms of work-life balance, how they expect to be treated and empowered in the workplace, rightly or wrongly. Check out that nearly 40% of younger employees have heard offensive remarks related to age, whether that's a greater sensitivity to others or to themselves. They're the ones whose antenna is tuned most keenly to those kind of remarks. And it's the older employees who seem to see less of it or be bothered by less of it. So we thought that was a pretty interesting fact, further confirming what that younger demographic or how they're approaching the workplace. And then finally, just another data point related to gender. And again, on each of these questions, you can slice and dice the data many different ways. So we just picked out a few highlights. Have you felt passed over for promotion due to gender? Does this number surprise you? Is it higher, lower than what you might expect? A quarter of women feel like they have been passed over due to their gender. Yet 18% of men which is a pretty sizable number as well. And if you drill down into that based on region, based on rank within the company, based on political affiliation, you see various interesting trends. So the broadest conclusion you can draw is you're not dealing with a monolithic perception of workplace dynamics. You're seeing a lot of differences based on who people are, where they're coming from, how they self-identify. Let me pass back for a few more data points and thoughts for action from Sheila. We're hoping all of this information sort of seeds the day, gives you some good context for the conversations to follow. And again, you're welcome to drill down into the data later on your own. Sheila, back to you.
Thank you, Ted. So the data points that Ted and I just shared with you, as he said, is just the top of the iceberg. There's so much more to uncover. And as you can imagine, as a communications firm, we looked at this data and we seek to filter it as to how can communications help to solve some of these issues in organizations. So what you're seeing in front of you are our survey results from when we asked participants, when you look at leadership, is DEI communications a top priority, right? Or do you just have a DEI plan that kind of sits in a drawer, people talking about it? And you'll see here from the data that when we look to our leaders in our organization, well, half of them say, yeah, it is a priority. This is important to us, right? But as we move throughout the organization, you see, well, managers don't see it quite the way that executives are seeing it. And when you look at non-management, they're not seeing it that way either. So there's work to be done here. Communication gaps exist. And what can we do to change that? So we drilled down a little bit further and we looked at, is your leadership doing it right? Like if they're doing it, are they doing it right? Well, 52% say just right. Well, that's good. Again, areas to drill down onto. Well, what does just right mean, right? 24% they'll say not enough. So again, work to be done. If we're doing and engaging in DEI activities within our organization, why aren't we communicating with it? Why aren't we showing that priority in a day-to-day way? Another interesting number is that 13% who say too much. Now, if that were in data that showed up in our organization, I'd want to drill down and find out, well, what do you mean? Is it too much? Is it like I'm all in and you don't have to keep telling me about it because I'm right there, which is great? Or is it that I'm disinterested or disengaged and I really don't care about this? And that's a number to peel because again, for those people who feel that way, they're not helping to foster an inclusive environment. Drilling down further in that area, as you can see to the right side of the slide, that for those who believe leadership's not doing enough, well, again, not surprisingly, executives don't believe that so much. And those in the non-managerial roles believe it a little bit more, that leadership's not doing enough. Gender disparities. Well, women almost 3 times as much as men say we can do better with our communications. So we thought about that and we came up with 5 action items, 5 from a list of many. I'm sure many of you on this call have a number of ways that you think about how to communicate more effectively and in a more inclusive way. So what you see here in front of you are 5 tips. You can read them a lot faster than I can speak to them. But what I would like to do, and allow me for this one moment to refer to my notes because there are a couple of points here for each one. And if you want and feel that you need to, feel free to jot down some notes here that might be helpful for you in your organization. So number 1, communicating authentically and transparently. This is an opportunity really to check your bias. Right? If you are a communicator in your organization or someone who helps the communicators in your organization, Dr. Nazreen Banaji's IAT test, her implicit bias test, is a wonderful tool for people to recognize that they have biases. We all do. Right? So checking that is going to be critically important. You want to learn from your unconscious biases and you want to be honest. Honesty is important. Being authentic and real, we can sniff out a phony, right? So if your leaders are saying one thing and doing the other, it's not going to work to build an inclusive environment. So those are critically important things to do. Number 2, there's a saying, your word is your bond. If you say these are DEI values, then are you living it? Are you showing it? Are you reinforcing it? Right? If your DEI values are just on your website or quotes on an annual report or mentions from your CEO 4 times a year at the town hall, you're missing an opportunity here. Share those values. Take care of those values. Take moments where you're celebrating those values. As Ted said earlier, one of our values is curiosity. Okay? Talk about what does that mean for your organization? What does that particular value mean for your organization? Share that in meetings, in writing, in newsletters. Talk about that so people know that you're being real about what you want to do. Number 3, well, inclusive language. Now, when I talk about inclusive language, that goes way beyond pronouns, which are very important, right? There are a lot of resources online where you can research and find out language you should not be using, language that may come across as a microaggression, language that will divide instead of unite your team. So I encourage you to look at those resources online because words matter. Also, you have to remember we're all different in how we perceive and what we need. So it's not just our diversity that you can see, but how we take in information is critically important. Okay? Certain words mean certain things. So we want to be careful in how we use those words. Number 4, inclusive leadership. We can't have inclusivity without our leaders demonstrating those values. So take the time to ensure that your leaders understand that. Outside of communicating, make sure you're building inclusive leaders. And that takes time, that takes training. Inclusive leaders aren't born, right? There's training that goes into it. It's understanding, it's learning more, it's asking questions. That's critically important. So when you provide that foundation for your leaders, communicate on an ongoing basis about what that means, what an inclusive culture means to our organization. Share those moments and make sure you're reinforcing that your inclusive leaders are building those inclusive cultures. And 5, celebrate that. Share it, talk about it. Leaders need to be where the action is happening. If there's an ERG meeting or event going on, leaders should be there. And then leaders should talk about it. They should celebrate the fact that this is a wonderful Black History Month event, for example. We need to communicate in a way that shows that we are being true to our DEI values, that show that we are being true to inclusivity, and that we want to build inclusive cultures. Most importantly, listen. We can do so many things as DEI leaders in our organizations, but if we're not listening to the people around us, we fail. Everyone has needs, and it's important to hear them out, to actively listen, and then once you've listened, to let them know you've heard. The other thing is to acknowledge issues and mistakes. Now, this can be a challenge sometimes for leaders, right? We've been taught not to admit a mistake, but dare I say the best leaders are empathetic leaders, leaders who understand, leaders who are transparent, and leaders who are strong enough to say, we did this wrong. I got this wrong. Our organization can do better. When your organization hears and sees that as you communicate up and down throughout the organization, you help to build a more inclusive environment. So that's what Ted and I wanted to share with you today. So we hope that these tips have been helpful. I do want to pose a question before we go into Q&A. And that question is, as we talk about surveys, have you done any DEI surveys in your organizations that have revealed to you key findings that have helped you communicate more effectively? Or simply looked at general surveys that your organization has done and uncovered things that made you realize, oh, we could be doing better here. Oh, here's where we need to focus. So if any of you have any responses to that, we'd love to hear from you. But of course, if there are any other questions, we now open the floor.
So Sheila, thank you so very much. I mean, that is a lot of great but sobering information. I'm sure everyone on this Zoom call will agree that there is just still so much work to do, but it's these surveys and this conference today that is giving me personally great hope that we are absolutely going in the right direction, but we have to get out of this whole thing of being afraid to seem nosy. Yeah.
Mm.
We need to embrace curiosity in our work together. And I'm so proud of our work, the work that Alexina has done with Taft together, where we're truly exploring how do we get to that next level, even when companies say, yeah, we got this, we're doing it. We're, okay, so what are you doing? Exactly what you said, Sheila. What are we doing? And how's it working out? And if it's great, how can we make it better and shout about it and celebrate it? But if it's not so great, what did you learn? And share that with us, right? What now, and this is both for both you or Ted or both, if you would like. What do we do with the company that says, no, we got this? And we do. Every employee has taken a webinar that is 15 minutes of intense web-based training. So we got it. What do we do with them?
Mm. Well, that's an interesting one. I'll start, Ted, if you wanted to add to it as well. That's an opportunity. If someone were to say, that's an opportunity to ask a lot of, dare I say, questions, right? What do you mean we've got it? What's happening in your work groups? Are you seeing people of color progressing throughout your organization? Are you hearing about, inappropriate things being said at meetings or events? And if there's any kind of nod or moment of hesitation, that should demonstrate we don't have it. If there's one problem somewhere along the chain, it can permeate into other areas. So that's a real important way to look at it. And I'll toss it to Ted. I'm sure he'll probably talk about surveys, because surveys will be a really good thing to do in this moment as well. Ted?
Yeah, exactly. I think it gets back to listening. So first, Jackie, I'd say to any organization that's doing training regularly, great. That's a start. That's an important piece of the picture. But listening and creating safe places for employees to express themselves is so important. And that can be a combination of anonymous surveys where they can give frank feedback and management can receive it. Creating forums where people can express themselves. We do a monthly feelings forum at our firm where people are encouraged to come in and talk about what's going on in the world or in the workplace. But listening and adapting to what you hear, because training is important, but you've got to really measure whether you're moving the needle on creating an inclusive workplace, which I think is everyone's goal here.
Thank you both so much. And just for everyone on the call today, the survey, this that Ted and Sheila shared with us is going to be sent to everyone after this meeting, but it is also loaded up on the website of this conference. So I just have to say, one of the most key things that I heard you all say today is that senior leadership needs to be vulnerable. And everyone else needs to realize that just because I have CEO after my name does not mean that I'm not a human being that is suffering as much, if maybe more, than everyone else, but we're all in this together, and hence the title of this conference today, which is so apropos. I will say we have had a request. If you could plug in the Project Implicit Bias link so that people can go to that, that would be wonderful. If you could put that in the chat, that would be wonderful. And I am trying to see if we have any other questions, but I don't see anything right now. So, oh, someone just said, oh, it's a comment. It's just a comment. So, and it's to everyone, so we can go ahead and read that on our own. So it has been a pleasure, Ted and Sheila, to be with you this morning. I want to say thank you for this great information, so useful, but again, so sobering. So let's keep our work going strong, and let's keep talking about all the things that we've done great and all the things that we need to still work on together. So thank
Absolutely.
you. Absolutely.
We really appreciate the chance to share the
Yes.
research, and thank NJBIA for co-sponsoring it over these years. I think New Jersey's ahead of the game in putting our ear to the ground and being responsive to what we're seeing, but there's always more work to be done. So thanks so much.